When Michael discovers his wife's betrayal, his world crumbles, leaving him questioning their once stable marriage. As shocking revelations unfold, he learns that her affair was only part of a larger web of deceit targeting their lives and love. Faced with heartbreak, manipulation, and external threats, Michael and Elena must confront their deepest fears, their own flaws, and the forces working against them. Will they rise above the chaos, or will the weight of betrayal prove too much to bear? This is a gripping tale of love, revenge, and resilience that will keep you hooked until the very last moment. Fall in Brighton was always picturesque, the kind of small-town charm that made life feel simple, predictable. For Michael and Elena Garcia, their home in this idyllic neighborhood wasn't just a house. It was a symbol of everything they had worked for together. 10 years of marriage, 2 kids, and a life built on shared dreams. Michael, a teacher at the local high school, had a calm, steady presence. He was the kind of man who woke up early to brew coffee for Elena and pack the kids' lunches. His students loved him, not because he was strict, but because he had a way of making them believe in themselves. At home, though, he struggled with something he rarely showed the outside world, a nagging feeling that he wasn't enough. Elena, on the other hand, was a force of nature. She worked part-time as a freelance event planner and spent her days juggling work and the kids. Her energy seemed boundless. She was the mom who always remembered birthdays, the wife who made surprise dinners, and the neighbor who showed up with a casserole when someone was sick. But there was something else beneath her warm smile, a restlessness she couldn't quite shake. Their marriage wasn't perfect, what marriage is. But they had built a rhythm, a shared life, and an understanding. Or so Michael thought. It started with little things. The way Elena's phone was suddenly always face down on the counter. Her vague answers about where she'd been when she came home later than usual. The laughter he overheard from her office late at night when she said she was working on a client's event proposal. Michael brushed it off at first. Eleanor was a people person. She thrived on connection. But the laughter wasn't hers alone. It was joined by a low, unfamiliar voice on the other end of the line. He told himself it was nothing, even as doubt crept into the corners of his mind. One Saturday morning, as Michael sat at the kitchen table grading papers, Elena came downstairs in a rush. She was dressed impeccably, her makeup flawless, and her favorite red dress hugged her figure. It wasn't unusual for her to dress up, but it caught Michael off guard. "Big plans today?" he asked, trying to keep his tone casual. "Just meeting a new client," she said with a bright smile. "They're planning a gala, so I want to make a good impression." He nodded, returning his focus to the essays in front of him. But something about the way she avoided his eyes stayed with him long after she left. By the time the kids were in bed that night, Michael had convinced himself he was overthinking things. Still, he couldn't shake the feeling, so he did something he'd never done before. He picked up Elena's phone. It was locked, of course, but her text notifications flashed across the screen. A message caught his eye. "Tonight was perfect. Can't wait to see you again." The words felt like a punch to the gut. He stared at the screen, his mind racing. Was this a misunderstanding? A joke? But as he read the name attached to the message, Nate, he felt a deep, sinking dread. He didn't recognize the name. Michael put the phone down quickly, as if it had burned him. His chest tightened as questions flooded his mind. Who was Nate? And what did tonight mean? He wanted to confront Elena immediately, but a small voice inside him told him to wait. He needed to know more. The following week, he started paying closer attention. He noticed the way she lingered a little too long in the car after coming home. The way her laughter seemed lighter, freer when she was texting. He hated the way it made him feel, like a stranger in his own life. On Wednesday night, he decided to follow her. When she said she was meeting a client at the coffee shop downtown, he waited 15 minutes before grabbing his jacket and heading out. His heart pounded as he parked a few spaces away from her car, his hands gripping the steering wheel. He saw her through the window. She wasn't meeting a client. She was sitting across from a man in a crisp white shirt, his sleeves rolled up, his hand resting too comfortably on the table between them. They were laughing, an easy, intimate laugh that cut through Michael like a knife. When Elena leaned forward, her fingers brushing the man's hand, Michael felt something inside him break. This wasn't a misunderstanding. It wasn't paranoia. It was real. He drove home in silence, his knuckles white on the steering wheel. That night, as Elena slid into bed beside him, he stared at the ceiling, every breath feeling heavier than the last. He didn't know how to confront her, but he knew he couldn't let this go. By Friday, he had a plan. He wasn't proud of it, but he needed answers. While Elena was in the shower, he unlocked her phone using the password he had seen her type 100 times. He scrolled through her messages until he found Nate's name. The messages were undeniable. Plans for secret meetings, shared jokes, and declarations of affection. Michael's hands trembled as he read them. He stopped when he reached a photo. A picture of Elena smiling, her hair windswept, taken by someone else. The caption read, "I can't stop thinking about this day." Michael closed the phone and sat there for what felt like hours, his thoughts spinning. He thought about their kids, their life, and everything they had built together. He thought about how he could have missed this, how he could have been so blind. That evening, as they sat at the dinner table with their kids, Michael forced himself to act normal. He didn't know how to bring it up, not yet. But every time Elena laughed, every time she reached across the table to touch his hand, it felt hollow. Later that night, after the kids were asleep, he finally spoke. "Elena," he said, his voice steady but cold, "we need to talk." She looked up from her laptop, her expression wary. "What's wrong?" "I know," he said simply. Her face froze. For a moment, she didn't move, didn't blink. Then she closed her laptop slowly. "Know what?" "About Nate. About the meetings, about the lies." Her breath caught, and for a moment, he saw panic flash in her eyes, but she recovered quickly. "It's not what you think, Michael," she said, her voice trembling. "It's complicated." "Complicated?" he repeated, his voice rising. "You've been sneaking around behind my back. How is that complicated?" She stood, wrapping her arms around herself. "I didn't mean for it to happen," she said, tears welling up. "It just... Michael, I've been feeling so alone, you're always so busy, and I needed someone to talk to." "And that someone couldn't be me?" he shot back, his voice breaking. The room fell into a heavy silence. For the first time in their marriage, Michael felt like he didn't recognize the woman standing in front of him. Everything he thought he knew about their life, their love, had been thrown into question. Their world was beginning to crumble, and the cracks were spreading faster than either of them could repair. Michael sat in the quiet aftermath of Elena's revelation, his mind reeling. She stood across the room, her arms folded protectively around herself, as though she could shield against the storm brewing between them. The weight of her confession hung in the air, and for a moment, neither of them spoke. Finally, Michael broke the silence. "So, what now?" he asked, his voice tight. "Are you planning to keep seeing him, or was this just—" He stopped himself, swallowing the bitter words threatening to escape. Elena took a hesitant step forward, her eyes brimming with tears. "I ended it," she said softly. "Before you found out it wasn't. I didn't want it to go as far as it did." Her words didn't offer the comfort she hoped. Michael's jaw clenched, and he shook his head. "You think that makes it better? You ended it because you got caught." "That's not fair," she snapped, her tone defensive. "I ended it because I realized how much I was risking. Our family, everything we've built. I'm sorry, Michael." I made a mistake, a terrible mistake. Michael's eyes narrowed. A mistake is spilling coffee on the carpet. A mistake isn't months of lying, sneaking around and choosing someone else over your husband. Her lip quivered, but she didn't look away. I know you're angry. I know I don't deserve your forgiveness, but I'm not sure forgiveness is even on the table right now. He cut in sharply. The words felt like a dagger, and Elena flinched. Please, Michael, she pleaded, her voice cracking. Don't shut me out. We can work through this. We have to. Michael exhaled heavily, running a hand through his hair. He wanted to believe her, to cling to the life they had built. But the trust that had once formed the foundation of their marriage now felt like sand slipping through his fingers. That night, Michael slept on the couch. Or rather, he tried to. Every time he closed his eyes, images of Elena and Nate flashed behind his eyelids. Her laughter, her smile, things he thought were only his, shared with another man. He barely slept a wink. The following days were a blur of tension. At breakfast, the kids' cheerful chatter filled the silence between Michael and Eleanor. At night, they barely exchanged a word. Every interaction felt like walking on shattered glass, the sharp edges cutting deeper with each step. But Michael wasn't just grappling with his feelings about Elena. The messages and photos he had uncovered left him with questions about Nate, questions he couldn't ignore. Who was this man? And why did he feel so comfortable inserting himself into Michael's marriage? One evening, after putting the kids to bed, Michael sat at the kitchen table, scrolling through Eleanor's messages again. He knew he shouldn't, it felt invasive, but he needed answers. Nate's phone number stared back at him, daring him to take the next step. He hesitated, his thumb hovering over the call button. Did he really want to confront this man? What would he even say? But before he could overthink it, his thumb pressed down, and the phone began to ring. Hello? Nate's voice was smooth, casual, as if he had no idea who might be on the other end. Michael's grip on the phone tightened. It's Michael, he said, his voice steady but cold. Eleanor's husband. There was a pause. A long, uncomfortable silence that spoke volumes. Finally, Nate cleared his throat. I didn't expect to hear from you. I'm sure you didn't, Michael replied. But we need to talk man to man. Nate sighed, his tone shifting. Look, Michael, I didn't mean to complicate things. I didn't plan for any of this to happen. Save it, Michael snapped. This isn't about your intentions. This is about you crossing a line that was never yours to cross. I care about Eleanor, Nate said, his voice softening. I didn't want to hurt her. Michael's laugh was bitter. You didn't want to hurt her. What about me? What about our kids? Did you ever think about the damage you were doing? Another pause. Then, quietly, I'm sorry. The words didn't feel like enough. They didn't erase the months of betrayal, the nights Michael had spent doubting himself, wondering where he had gone wrong. But he hung up the phone, feeling a strange sense of relief. At least now, he knew Nate wasn't some faceless phantom. He was just a man, flawed, weak, and undeserving of the pedestal Michael had unconsciously built for him. The next morning, Michael decided it was time to address the growing tension at home. Over breakfast, he looked across the table at Elena, who was nervously stirring her coffee. We need to figure out what happens next, he said bluntly. Elena nodded, her expression unreadable. I know I've been thinking about that too. Their conversation was tense, but honest. Michael didn't sugarcoat his feelings. He told her how betrayed he felt, how deeply her actions had cut him. Elena, for her part, took responsibility, apologizing again and again. But apologies, Michael realized, weren't enough. Actions mattered more than words. They agreed to try counseling, though the idea felt foreign to both of them. They scheduled their first session for the following week, neither sure if it would help, but both knowing they had to try. In the meantime, Michael threw himself into work. He stayed late at school, grading papers and coaching the soccer team. It was easier than going home, where every room felt haunted by memories of what had happened. Elena, meanwhile, focused on the kids and her clients, trying to keep her life moving forward, even as the ground beneath her felt unsteady. Their first counseling session was awkward. The therapist, a calm and measured woman named Dr. Rains, asked questions that felt invasive but necessary. She had them talk about their feelings, their fears, and the reasons they had stayed together for so long. For the first time, Michael admitted something he hadn't even fully realized. "I think I've always been afraid I wasn't enough for Elena," he said, his voice low. She's so vibrant, so full of life, and I'm just me." Elena's eyes filled with tears. "Michael, you've always been more than enough. I just lost sight of that. I let my own insecurities cloud what we have." Their words hung in the air, raw and vulnerable. It wasn't a solution, but it was a start. As the weeks passed, their relationship began to shift. It wasn't easy. Some days, Michael felt like they were making progress. Other days, he wasn't sure if they could ever truly repair what had been broken. But they were trying, and that mattered. One evening, as they sat on the couch after putting the kids to bed, Elena reached for Michael's hand. "I know I've hurt you," she said quietly, "but I want to spend the rest of my life making it up to you if you'll let me." Michael looked at her, his expression softening. "I want to believe that," he said, "but it's going to take time." Eleanor nodded. "I understand." Their road ahead was uncertain, filled with challenges they couldn't yet see. But for the first time in months, there was a flicker of hope, a fragile but real possibility that they might find their way back to each other. As Michael sat there, holding Elena's hand, he realized that healing wasn't about forgetting. It was about learning, growing, and choosing every day to fight for what mattered most. If you're enjoying this story and want to see how it all unfolds, don't forget to like, share, comment, and subscribe to my channel. Your support helps bring more stories like this to life. Michael and Elena's decision to go to counseling was a step forward, but it didn't immediately fix things. The wounds of betrayal don't heal overnight, and for Michael, every day felt like a battle between hope and anger. He wanted to believe Elena's promises, to trust that their marriage could survive, but the cracks in their relationship were hard to ignore. Elena, for her part, threw herself into the process of repairing their marriage. She stopped meeting with clients in secret, shared her phone passwords with Michael, and even suggested they spend more time as a family. Her efforts were genuine, but they also came with their own challenges. The more she tried to make things right, the more she was reminded of how much she had broken. One evening, as they sat together on the couch, Eleanor brought up something she had been thinking about. "I was wondering if we could go away for the weekend," she said hesitantly. "Just the two of us. I think we need some time to reconnect." Michael looked at her, his expression unreadable. "You think a weekend trip will fix everything?" "No," Elena admitted. "But maybe it's a start. We could use some time away from all of this. To talk. To remember why we fell in love in the first place." Her words stirred something in Michael. He wanted to scoff, to brush off the idea as naive, but deep down, he knew she was right. They needed to step away from the chaos, even if just for a little while. "All right," he said finally. "Let's do it." The following weekend, they packed their bags and headed to a small cabin by the lake, a place they used to visit before the kids were born. The drive was quiet, but not tense, and for the first time in weeks, Michael felt a glimmer of something he hadn't in a long time. Hope. That first night, they sat by the fire, sipping wine and reminiscing about their early days together. Michael found himself laughing at memories he hadn't thought about in years, like the time they got lost on a hiking trail and ended up eating granola bars for dinner. For a moment, it felt like they were those same young, carefree versions of themselves, but the illusion didn't last. The next morning, as they were making breakfast, Michael's phone buzzed. He glanced at the screen and frowned. "Who is it?" Eleanor asked. "It's Nate," Michael said, his tone cold. "He wants to meet." Eleanor's face paled. "Why would he want to meet you?" "I don't know," Michael said, his jaw tightening. "But I'm going to find out." Despite Elena's protests, Michael agreed to meet Nate at a nearby coffee shop. When he arrived, Nate was already sitting at a table by the window, looking surprisingly composed. Michael sat down across from him, his expression guarded. "What do you want?" Michael asked bluntly. Nate leaned back in his chair, his gaze steady. "I owe you the truth." Michael's eyes narrowed. "The truth? You mean the truth about how you went after my wife?" Nate flinched, but didn't look away. "It's not what you think, Michael, yes. I had feelings for Elena, but there's more to this than you know." Michael's fists clenched under the table. "What are you talking about?" Nate hesitated, then leaned forward, lowering his voice. "There's someone else involved in this. Someone who wanted to hurt you. I didn't realize it at first, but now it's clear they used me to get to you." Michael's heart pounded in his chest. "Who?" Nate reached into his pocket and pulled out a folded piece of paper. "This is everything I know. I'm not proud of what I did, but I think you deserve to know the truth." Michael took the paper, his hands trembling. He opened it and scanned the contents. It was a series of messages between Nate and an anonymous number, detailing plans to distract Michael and destabilize his marriage. His mind raced. Who could have orchestrated this, and why? When Michael returned to the cabin, Elena was waiting anxiously. He handed her the paper without a word and watched as her eyes widened in shock. "Do you know anything about this?" he asked, his voice low. Elena shook her head, her hands shaking. "No. I swear, Michael, I don't know who this could be." The discovery added a new layer of complexity to their already fragile relationship. As they pieced through the messages together, they realized that whoever was behind this had been watching them for months, planting seeds of doubt and mistrust. That night, as they lay in bed, Michael turned to Eleanor. "I don't know who's doing this or why, but I'm going to find out." Eleanor reached for his hand. "We'll find out together." The following week was a whirlwind of revelations. Michael began digging into his work contacts, looking for any signs of someone with a grudge against him. Meanwhile, Eleanor reached out to her event planning network, hoping to uncover clues about Nate's anonymous collaborator. It didn't take long for the pieces to start coming together. Michael discovered that one of his business rivals, a man named Victor Grant, had a history of underhanded tactics. Victor had lost a major contract to Michael's company earlier that year, and it wasn't hard to imagine him seeking revenge. When Michael confronted Victor at a local networking event, the man didn't deny it. "You took something from me, Garcia," Victor said with a smirk. "I just wanted to see how it felt to have something taken from you." Michael's blood boiled. "You crossed a line, Victor. This wasn't business. It was personal." Victor shrugged. "Maybe next time you'll think twice before stepping on someone else's toes." The confrontation solidified Michael's resolve. He wasn't just fighting for his marriage anymore. He was fighting for his family, his reputation, and everything he had built. As the weeks passed, Michael and Elena began to rebuild their relationship. The counseling sessions continued, and while the process was slow and painful, it was also transformative. They learned to communicate in ways they never had before, to address their insecurities and fears instead of burying them. One night, As they sat together on the porch, watching the sunset, Michael turned to Elena. "I don't know what the future holds," he said, "but I know I want to face it with you." Elena's eyes filled with tears. "Me too," she whispered. Their journey wasn't over, but for the first time in a long time, they felt like they were on the same path. If you've been hooked on this story so far, don't forget to like, share, and subscribe to the channel. There's more to come as we explore how Michael and Elena navigate the aftermath of betrayal and rediscover what it means to truly love and forgive. Michael's confrontation with Victor left him furious but determined. The revelation that someone had orchestrated an elaborate plan to destroy his marriage didn't lessen the pain of Elena's betrayal, but it added a new dimension to the chaos. This wasn't just about trust lost between two people. It was about outside forces preying on vulnerabilities they hadn't even known they had. Michael threw himself into uncovering every detail of Victor's involvement, determined to hold him accountable. Meanwhile, Eleanor was doing everything she could to repair the damage within their home. She juggled counseling sessions, family dinners, and late-night talks with Michael, all while battling the guilt that consumed her. Their progress was slow and messy. Some nights ended in quiet, shared moments, while others ended with shouting matches that left them both raw and exhausted. But they were still trying. And trying was something. The real turning point came one evening when Michael received an anonymous email. It contained attachments, photos, messages, and detailed notes that tied Victor to Nate, along with evidence that Victor had paid Nate to initiate contact with Eleanor. The email was signed with a single name: a friend. Michael stared at the screen in disbelief. For weeks he'd suspected that Victor was behind the chaos, but seeing the proof laid out in front of him brought a mix of emotions: anger, relief, and a newfound determination to fight back. That night, he showed the email to Elena. She read it in silence, her expression shifting from shock to shame. "It was never real," she whispered. "Nate. He was playing me the whole time." Michael nodded, his jaw clenched. "It doesn't excuse what you did, Elena. But it changes how we fight this." Elena looked up at him, tears brimming in her eyes. "How do we fight this, Michael? What do we do?" "We take everything," he said firmly. "Every message, every photo, every piece of evidence. And we expose Victor for what he's done." The next day, Michael contacted a lawyer, determined to protect his family and his career. He knew Victor's actions weren't just personal, they bordered on illegal. Together, he and his lawyer began piecing together a case that would hold Victor accountable. But Victor wasn't going to back down easily. When he caught wind of Michael's plans, he escalated his tactics, spreading rumors about Michael at work and even attempting to contact Eleanor again. His efforts only strengthened Michael's resolve. One afternoon, as Michael was leaving work, he found a note taped to his car windshield. It read, "Stop digging, or you'll regret it." Michael crumpled the note in his hand, his anger boiling over. Threats weren't going to scare him off. Not now. Not after everything Victor had already done. That evening, he sat down with Eleanor and their counselor, Dr. Rains. For weeks, they had been working through their issues, slowly rebuilding the trust that had been shattered. But tonight, Michael needed to talk about something else. "I don't know where this ends," he admitted, his voice heavy. "But I do know that I'm tired of feeling like we're at someone else's mercy. Victor's game's end now." Elena reached for his hand. "Whatever happens, I'm with you. I know I've hurt you, and I know I'm part of why we're here, but I'm with you." Her words, though tentative, gave Michael a small but crucial spark of hope. For the first time in weeks, he felt like they were truly on the same team. The next few weeks were a whirlwind. Michael and his lawyer gathered more evidence, while Elena worked on her own statement, acknowledging her role in the events, but also highlighting Victor's manipulation. They submitted everything to the appropriate authorities, ensuring that Victor's actions would be investigated. Then came the meeting. Victor, clearly cornered, attempted to bluff his way out, but the evidence was overwhelming. As Michael laid out every detail, the payments to Nate, the orchestrated plan to disrupt his marriage, and the threats, Victor's smug facade began to crack. "You think you've won?" Victor spat, his voice venomous. "You think this changes anything?" "It changes everything," Michael replied, his voice calm but firm. "And you're going to face the consequences." The fallout was swift. Victor's reputation took a nosedive, and legal proceedings were initiated against him. For Michael and Eleanor, it wasn't just a victory. It was a chance to finally close the chapter on the chaos that had upended their lives. But the story didn't end there. The real challenge lay in what came next. With Victor's influence removed, Michael and Eleanor were left to rebuild, not just their marriage, but their sense of trust and stability. It wasn't easy. There were still moments of doubt, still nights when the weight of everything threatened to pull them under. But they kept going. One evening, as they sat together on the back porch, watching the stars, Michael turned to Eleanor. "Do you think we'll ever feel normal again?" Eleanor considered the question for a moment before answering. "I don't think we'll ever go back to the way things were, but maybe that's not a bad thing. Maybe we're meant to grow from this, to become something stronger." Her words lingered in the air, offering a fragile but real sense of hope. Their journey wasn't over, but they were moving forward together. If you've been gripped by this story and want to see how Michael and Elena navigate the next steps of their journey, don't forget to like, share, and subscribe to the channel. Your support makes it possible to tell stories that inspire, challenge, and remind us of the resilience of the human spirit. Michael sat in his lawyer's office, reviewing the mountain of evidence they had compiled against Victor. The atmosphere was heavy with anticipation. Each piece of documentation, every text, email, and payment record was a brick in the wall, closing in on Victor's schemes. But as solid as the case seemed, Michael couldn't shake the knot in his stomach. This wasn't just about winning a legal battle. It was about reclaiming the life Victor had nearly destroyed. When the day of the hearing arrived, Michael felt an almost unbearable mix of tension and determination. He glanced at Eleanor as they walked into the courthouse together. She looked nervous but resolute, her hand gripping his tightly. This was as much her fight as it was his, and for better or worse, they were in it together. Inside, Victor's legal team tried to dismiss the accusations, painting Michael as a disgruntled businessman with a vendetta, but the evidence spoke for itself. The payments to Nate, the orchestrated plans to sabotage Michael's marriage, the threats, it was all laid bare. For the first time, Michael saw Victor's cocky exterior crack under the weight of the truth. The turning point came when Nate was called to testify. His remorse was palpable as he described how Victor had manipulated him, offering money and promises of future opportunities in exchange for his role in the plan. "I didn't realize how far it would go," Nate admitted, his voice breaking. "I didn't know it would destroy lives." Hearing those words brought a strange sense of vindication for Michael. It didn't erase the pain, but it confirmed that he wasn't crazy, that the betrayal he had felt wasn't entirely born of his own insecurities. Someone had deliberately set out to tear his life apart, and now that person was finally being held accountable. By the time the hearing ended, it was clear Victor's position was untenable. The court ruled in Michael's favor, and Victor faced both legal repercussions and professional disgrace. As they walked out of the courthouse, Michael let out a breath he hadn't realized he'd been holding. "It's over," Eleanor said softly, looking up at him. "We did it." Michael nodded, but he didn't share her relief, at least not entirely. "The fight with Victor is over," he said, "but our fight, it's still ongoing." That night, they sat together on the couch, the house quiet around them. For the first time in what felt like forever, they talked. Not about Victor or Nate, but about themselves. About the cracks that had existed in their marriage long before anyone else entered the picture. I blamed you, Michael admitted, his voice low. For so much, for not seeing me, for not making me feel like I mattered. But I think I wasn't seeing you either. Elena wiped a tear from her cheek. I felt invisible, she said. Not because of you, but because of my own fears. I was scared that I wasn't enough. That you'd wake up one day and realize you deserved better. Her words hit Michael harder than he expected. He had always seen Elena as confident, almost untouchable. Hearing her vulnerabilities laid bare made him realize how much they had both hidden from each other over the years. Maybe we both deserve better, he said. Better than what we've been giving each other. Elena nodded, a small smile breaking through her tears. Then let's work on that together. The weeks that followed were anything but easy. Michael and Elena began the slow, often painful process of rebuilding their marriage. They leaned heavily on their counselor, digging into the unspoken fears and resentments that had festered for so long. It wasn't always smooth. Some sessions ended with one or both of them in tears, their wounds still too raw to handle. But there were also moments of connection that reminded them why they had fallen in love in the first place. Quiet walks in the park, shared laughter over old inside jokes, the simple comfort of sitting next to each other without the weight of unspoken tension. One evening, as they sat on the porch watching the sunset, Michael turned to Elena. Do you remember the first time we came here? Elena smiled, the memory bringing a warmth to her expression. You spilled wine all over the blanket, she said. I thought you were going to lose it, but you just laughed. I couldn't stop laughing, Michael said, chuckling at the memory. You looked so horrified, but then you started laughing too. Eleanor's smile softened. We were so carefree back then. Michael reached for her hand, his gaze steady. Maybe we can be again. Not the same as we were, but something better. Eleanor squeezed his hand. I'd like that. Their journey wasn't over, but for the first time in a long time, they both felt like they were moving forward. Not as individuals battling their own demons, but as partners rebuilding a life together. If this story has resonated with you, don't forget to like, share, and subscribe to the channel. Your support helps us bring more stories like this to life, reminding us all of the resilience of love, trust, and the human spirit. The aftermath of the court ruling against Victor didn't erase the pain, but it gave Michael and Elena a sense of closure. For months, they had been battling external chaos. But now, the real fight began. The fight to save what was left of their marriage. The stakes were higher than ever, and neither of them could ignore the fragile state of their relationship. Michael's focus shifted to their family. He started making an effort to be more present, showing up for dinner every night, and spending quality time with their kids. He wasn't perfect. There were still moments when he felt overwhelmed by resentment. But he knew that rebuilding trust required showing up, day after day. Elena, for her part, threw herself into the work of repair. She began journaling, reflecting on the choices that had led her to Nate and the ways she had let fear and insecurity drive her actions. In their counseling sessions, she admitted how much she had taken Michael's steadiness for granted, mistaking his quiet devotion for indifference. One evening, as they sat across from each other during a session, Dr. Rains asked a question that struck a nerve. What does forgiveness look like for each of you? Michael was the first to answer. Forgiveness for me isn't about pretending this never happened, he said, his voice steady but pained. It's about deciding that the love we've shared is worth more than the mistakes we've made. Elena's voice trembled as she replied. For me, forgiveness means letting go of the guilt that's been weighing me down. It means believing that I'm still worthy of being loved, even after everything I've done. The room fell silent as they absorbed each other's words. Forgiveness wouldn't come easily, but for the first time, they felt like they were on the same page. As the weeks turned into months, life began to find a new rhythm. Michael and Eleanor started doing things together again, cooking meals, taking family walks, and even tackling long-neglected home projects. These small acts of togetherness reminded them that healing didn't happen all at once. It happened in the little moments, the quiet choices to keep trying. But just as they began to find their footing, an unexpected revelation threatened to throw everything off balance. One afternoon, Michael received a call from a former colleague. The conversation started innocently enough. Small talk about work and family. But then the colleague mentioned something that made Michael's blood run cold. "You should know," the colleague said, his voice cautious. "Victor's still talking about you. He's telling people that he's not done yet." Michael felt a surge of anger and fear. He had thought the court ruling would be the end of Victor's interference, but it seemed the man's vendetta wasn't over. That evening, he shared the news with Eleanor. "Do you think he's bluffing?" Eleanor asked, her brow furrowed. Michael shook his head. "Victor doesn't bluff. If he's still trying to come after us, we need to be ready." They decided to take precautions, reaching out to their lawyer and alerting the authorities. But as the days passed without any clear sign of Victor's next move, the tension between them began to grow. The stress of living under constant threat was a stark reminder of how fragile their progress still was. The breaking point came one night when Michael returned home late from work. He found Elena sitting at the kitchen table, staring at her phone with a troubled expression. "What's wrong?" he asked, setting his bag down. She hesitated, then handed him the phone. It was a text message from an unknown number. The message was short but chilling. "You'll regret thinking this is over." Michael's jaw tightened as he read the words. "It's him," he said, his voice filled with certainty. "He's trying to scare us." Elena nodded, her hands trembling. "What do we do?" "We don't let him win," Michael said firmly. "We've come too far to let him tear us apart again." The next morning, they filed a report with the police, handing over the message as evidence. The authorities assured them they would look into it, but Michael couldn't shake the feeling that they were on their own. As the tension mounted, Michael and Elena found themselves falling back into old patterns, snapping at each other over minor disagreements, retreating into silence instead of facing their fears together. It was a stark reminder that their progress was still fragile, and that the wounds of the past hadn't fully healed. One evening, as they sat in the living room, Michael broke the silence. "I'm scared," he admitted, his voice barely above a whisper. "Not just of Victor, but of losing what we've worked so hard to rebuild." Eleanor looked at him, her eyes filled with unshed tears. "Me too," she said. "But I think we've learned something through all of this. We're stronger together than we are apart." Her words resonated with Michael, and for the first time in days, he felt a glimmer of hope. They weren't just fighting against Victor. They were fighting for each other. In the weeks that followed, they doubled down on their efforts to protect their family. They installed security cameras, kept their phones closely monitored, and leaned on their counselor for support. It wasn't easy, but it brought them closer in a way they hadn't anticipated. The final confrontation with Victor came in an unexpected way. One afternoon, while Michael was at work, Elena received a call from an unknown number. Against her better judgment, she answered. "Hello?" she said, her voice cautious. "Elena." Victor's voice sneered on the other end. "Still cleaning up your mess, I see." Her heart raced, but she forced herself to stay calm. "What do you want, Victor?" "I want you to know that Michael isn't as innocent as you think," he said, his tone dripping with malice. "You should ask him about some of the deals he's made. You might be surprised." The call ended abruptly, leaving Eleanor shaken, but determined that evening, she confronted Michael, sharing what Victor had said. "Is there any truth to this?" she asked, her voice steady but filled with urgency. Michael hesitated, his mind racing. He thought back to a business deal he had made years ago, one that had been perfectly legal but morally questionable. It wasn't something he was proud of, but it also wasn't the damning secret Victor wanted Eleanor to believe it was. "Yes," he admitted, meeting her gaze. "There was a deal, but it wasn't illegal. It was just complicated." Eleanor searched his face, her own expression unreadable. Then she nodded. "Thank you for telling me I needed to hear it from you, not from him." Her response surprised Michael. For the first time, he realized how much progress they had made. The foundation of trust they were rebuilding wasn't perfect, but it was strong enough to withstand Victor's final attempt to drive them apart. The next day, they filed one last report with the authorities, providing details of Victor's call. It wasn't long before the police arrested him for harassment and violating the terms of his previous charges. As Michael and Elena watched the news of Victor's arrest, they felt an overwhelming sense of relief. The storm that had overshadowed their lives for so long was finally over. If you've been following this story and felt the tension build with every twist and turn, don't forget to like, share, and subscribe to the channel. Your support keeps these stories alive and helps us dive into the most gripping tales of resilience and redemption. With Victor's arrest, it felt like the dark cloud looming over Michael and Elena's lives had finally begun to dissipate. Yet the aftermath of such a storm wasn't without its debris. While the immediate threat was gone, the emotional fallout lingered. The strain of months of uncertainty, betrayal, and rebuilding weighed heavily on them both. But now, for the first time in what felt like forever, they could see a path forward, one that was theirs to forge together. Michael decided to take time off work, a move that shocked his colleagues but felt necessary. His focus wasn't just on recuperating from the stress of the last year, but also on reconnecting with his family. He had spent so much time fighting external battles that he realized he needed to prioritize the home he was fighting for. One afternoon, as Michael and Elena sat on their back porch, watching their children play in the yard, he turned to her. "Do you ever think about starting over?" he asked. She glanced at him, a hint of worry in her eyes. "What do you mean, like moving?" Michael nodded. "Maybe not just a physical move, but leaving all of this behind, a fresh start for us." Elena considered his words, her gaze thoughtful. "I've thought about it," she admitted, "but I don't want running away to be our solution. If we leave, I want it to be because we're ready to build something new, not because we're scared of the past." Her words struck a chord with Michael. He realized that while a change of scenery might offer temporary relief, the real work had to come from within. They had to confront the scars they bore, not hide from them. In the weeks that followed, they focused on doing just that. Counseling sessions became less about mending immediate damage and more about understanding the deeper dynamics of their relationship. They delved into topics they had avoided for years. Michael's tendency to bury his emotions, Elena's fear of inadequacy, and the ways they had both allowed distance to grow between them. These conversations weren't easy, and sometimes they left both of them emotionally drained. But they also brought moments of clarity and connection. For every painful truth uncovered, there was a renewed sense of understanding, a reminder of why they had chosen each other in the first place. The real turning point came during a weekend retreat organized by their counselor. The retreat was designed for couples looking to rebuild trust and communication, and while Michael had initially been skeptical, Eleanor convinced him to give it a chance. The first day was filled with group exercises that felt awkward and forced. Michael couldn't help but feel like they were being asked to perform intimacy for strangers. But on the second day, during a private session led by Dr. Rains, something shifted. Dr. Rains asked them to write letters to each other. Letters that expressed not just their pain, but also their hopes for the future. They were given time to write in silence, the weight of the exercise pressing down on them both. When the time came to share their letters, Michael went first. His hands trembled slightly as he read aloud. "Eleanor," he began, his voice steady but filled with emotion. "I've spent so much time trying to understand why this happened, why we fell apart. And for a long time, all I could see was the hurt. But now, I see more. I see the ways I failed to show up for you, the ways I let my fear of being vulnerable keep me from truly connecting with you. I don't want to be that man anymore. I want to be the man you can count on, the man you deserve, and I hope, more than anything, that we can find our way back to each other." When he finished, he looked up to see tears streaming down Elena's face. She took a deep breath before reading her own letter. "Michael," she said, her voice shaking, "I don't know if I'll ever fully forgive myself for what I did, but I want you to know that it wasn't because I stopped loving you. I was lost, scared, and searching for something I thought I'd lost. But the truth is, it was never gone. You've always been my home, even when I didn't know how to show it. I want to spend the rest of my life proving that to you, proving that we're worth fighting for." By the time she finished, Michael couldn't hold back his tears. For the first time in months, he felt an overwhelming sense of hope, not just for their marriage, but for the life they could build together. As the retreat came to an end, they left with a renewed sense of purpose. They weren't just surviving anymore. They were actively working to create something new. In the months that followed, they continued to grow stronger. They found joy in small, everyday moments, cooking meals together, cheering on their kids at soccer games, and laughing at old movies on the couch. These moments weren't grand gestures, but they were the foundation of the life they were rebuilding. And while the scars of the past remained, they no longer defined their relationship. Instead, they served as reminders of how far they had come and how much they were willing to fight for each other. If this story has kept you on the edge of your seat, don't forget to like, share, and subscribe to the channel. Your support helps us bring more inspiring tales of resilience, love, and redemption to life. The storm that had once threatened to tear Michael and Elena's lives apart was finally over. In the quiet aftermath, they found themselves not only reflecting on what they had lost, but also on what they had gained. The months of turmoil had tested them in ways they could never have anticipated, but it had also given them something unexpected: clarity. Michael stood in the kitchen one morning, watching the sunrise through the window. The soft light cast a golden glow over the room, and for the first time in what felt like years, he felt at peace. Eleanor walked in, her hair tousled from sleep, and smiled at him. It was a simple moment, but it was enough to remind him of how far they'd come. Their journey had been anything but easy. The trust they were rebuilding wasn't perfect, but it was real. Through counseling, late-night conversations, and a commitment to facing their fears head-on, they had learned to communicate in ways they never had before. They didn't shy away from the hard truths anymore. They confronted them together. One of the biggest changes came in how they approached their relationship. They made time for each other in ways they hadn't in years. Date nights became a priority, not a luxury. They rediscovered the joy of simply being together, whether it was laughing over a shared meal, taking long walks, or even sitting in companionable silence. For Michael, the journey had been about more than just forgiving Elena. It had been about forgiving himself, too. He had carried the weight of his own insecurities for so long, believing that his quiet nature made him inadequate as a husband. But through their struggles, he came to see that love wasn't about grand gestures or constant excitement. It was about showing up, day after day, and choosing each other, even when things were hard. Elena's growth was equally profound. She had spent much of her life seeking validation from others, fearing that she wasn't enough. But facing the consequences of her choices forced her to confront those fears and recognize her own worth. She learned to value the steady, unshakable love Michael offered, and to trust in it, even when things weren't perfect. The final chapter of their journey was marked by a sense of renewal. They decided to renew their vows, not as a way to erase the past, but as a way to honor the new life they were building together. The ceremony was small, just close family and friends, held in their backyard under the same oak tree where Michael had proposed all those years ago. As they stood hand in hand, exchanging vows that carried the weight of everything they had been through, there wasn't a dry eye in the crowd. Michael's voice was steady as he spoke. "Eleanor, I've loved you from the moment I met you, and through every joy and every challenge, that love has only grown today. I choose you again, not despite the hardships we've faced, but because of them. You are my partner, my best friend, and the love of my life." Elena's voice trembled with emotion as she replied, "Michael, you've shown me what love really means. It's not perfect, it's not always easy, but it's real, and it's worth fighting for today. I vow to keep fighting for us, to choose you, to trust you, and to never take this love for granted again." Their children, standing nearby, clapped enthusiastically as the couple kissed. It was a moment of pure joy, a testament to their resilience and the strength of their commitment. In the days and weeks that followed, Michael and Elena found themselves settling into a new normal. The shadows of the past didn't disappear entirely, but they no longer defined their lives. Instead, those shadows served as reminders of how far they had come and how much they had overcome together. One evening, as they sat on the porch watching the stars, Eleanor leaned her head on Michael's shoulder. "Do you ever think about how close we came to losing this?" she asked softly. "Every day," Michael admitted. "But I also think about how lucky we are to have found our way back." Eleanor smiled. "I don't want to take it for granted, not ever again." "You won't," Michael said, his voice filled with quiet certainty. "Neither will I." Their story wasn't one of perfection. It was one of perseverance, of two people who had faced the worst and come out stronger for it. They weren't the same couple who had once stood at the altar, full of youthful optimism and untested love. They were something better, a team forged in fire, tempered by trials, and ready to face whatever came next. As their porch light flickered in the cool evening breeze, Michael and Elena sat hand in hand, their hearts full of gratitude for the second chance they had been given. If you've been inspired by Michael and Elena's journey and want to hear more stories of resilience, love, and growth, don't forget to like, share, and subscribe to the channel. Your support helps us continue sharing these heartfelt tales that remind us all of the power of hope and the strength of the human spirit. See you in the next story.